All right, I'm here with Andrea Jones-Roy, who is a consultant that helps businesses. How would you describe it? You help businesses become better versions of themselves. Like you help with them keep their employees happy. You. What are some of the things you help companies figure out
Yes,
that they weren't previously figuring out?
right. So it's more that I help companies figure out how to figure things out, if that makes sense. So I'm trained as a political scientist, so I do social science, and so I help companies design research projects to answer questions they have.
Like what?
Why are people leaving the company? Why aren't there more women in leadership? Why can't we recruit any people of color? That sort of thing.
So like, who asked you why can't we recruit people of color?
Frankly, not enough people are asking me that. But I work with a big company here in New York City that, like basically the short answer to that one is they're not even trying and they just keep recruiting from the same schools over and over and over again and they base it on social networks. But so companies who are interested in diversity don't know where to start and they kind of throw money and time at recruitment or at promotions or at retention, but they don't really have a plan. And so I help them go in and say, well, okay, let's design a study to understand why there aren't more, say, people of color in the lower levels of your company, like at the intro level.
And what would be it? Oh, so you gave a reason, which is that kind of the managers are just promoting from their schools or their
Right.
social networks or whatever.
Yeah.
And what do they then do to once you discover this?
Yeah.
What do they then do to fix the problem?
So that's one of the more frustrating things is that often they do very little. It really depends. To me, it has one of the benefits. I get to work with a lot of different companies, and some companies you give them this information, and they're like, "Oh my god!" and they immediately change like where they're recruiting. They start sending people to different career fairs. They try to like do different things, and then other companies are like, "Huh, okay." Yeah, but we really know what we're doing and we like people from this school. So, and you're like, well, I don't know why you hired me. So I think a lot of the
What do they
stuff.
pay you for a
Yeah.
study like that?
What do they pay me? It depends. It depends on if they want like multi-month like engagement or if they want like I don't know. Do you want me to say my rates?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So it's $250 an hour for like statistical work and up to $1,000 an hour for trainings.
But it seems
But
like
this
also
one is free, so don't worry about that. Yeah.
but also you're offering kind of a product, which is that you're designing a research experiment and then doing it.
Yeah.
Like, do you ever charge just one bulk thing for like you productize what you do?
Yeah. So and then that is sort of like I do an estimate based on those rates and work it out. So if I do like a project for a couple months, it's like $30,000 or something like that.
So it seems like you can also make it like a sort of almost like a not quite software as a service, but a research project as a service.
Yeah.
So you have like the same, so like the diversity test or engagement, like that you probably have a test for. Well, why are so many people quitting after they
Right.
are here for less than a year?
Right.
Like what do you do then? Someone comes to you and says, Andrea, we don't know what's going on. We're building our company, profits are great, but everybody's quitting after a year. We think we
Yeah.
could probably do better if they
Yeah.
stuck around after training.
Mm-hmm. So I actually did a project like that last year, and it was specifically about why women were leaving. Because if you looked, like a ton of people were leaving early on.
How many employees were at the company overall?
It's like 20,000. But I
Wow.
did their like U.S. mostly just their U.S. Population as opposed to like globally.
Because their Middle Eastern population might have a completely different
Exactly. Well, and
answer.
that was, I did a different project for them on something else, and that was one of the findings, which was like, well, it really depends on where you are and what the deal is. So that one was on people in the sales function, and it was like, it turns out it's hard to be a woman selling products in a culture that doesn't want women to work, and like that takeaway is not very useful in the United States. I mean, there's issues, but it's nowhere near that situation, right? But so for people leaving was a really interesting question. So I did a mix of like quantitative and qualitative work, which means I did a bunch of stuff with data and then I did a bunch of stuff with talking to people because I think sometimes, so I'm a data scientist, but sometimes we get so stuck in the data that it actually talking to a few people about what they think is going on gives you ideas for what to then look for further in the data. But so one of the things I did, I was like, well, if everyone's leaving, this particular one, the working hypothesis of the CEO was that women were leaving to start families. And I was like, okay, well, number one, if that's true, what are the observable implications of that? It would mean that they're leaving the company and not working at another company. So you can very easily, it's a little bit illegal, but you can very easily stalk all these people who've left on LinkedIn and say, are they or are they not working at another company? And if they are, maybe they didn't leave to start a family. Or if you think that maybe they still are starting a family, then you'd say, well, do these other companies offer more maternity benefits or flexible work or work from home or job sharing or anything like that? And it turned out not really. They were pretty much pure companies. So you're like, okay, we can rule that out as a plausible explanation for why people are leaving. So it's sort of like hypothesis testing, but for humans.
So you ruled it out because more than a certain percentage,
Like
like,
the vast majority. We're
okay,
all working
so like
somewhere else
80%
full time.
took jobs with similar maternity
Yeah.
policies, and so the CEO was wrong. Did he admit he was wrong?
Kind of. That's where I was like, the real difference I think is people being like willing to admit they were wrong and then willing to do something about it are two big steps. And like so frankly I'm finding I've only been doing this for a few years. I'm finding that the hardest part is this like persuasion or the like now what. So the takeaway was women were leaving because of dissatisfactions within the company itself and the company culture and all this kind of stuff.
So just to,
Yeah,
because like one thing you can do is if at every point, so the big problem is convincing them they need to do the research project. That's how you get a client.
right.
Then it's convincing them that their theorized answer might be wrong,
Right.
and then there's convincing them to take action. So there's three different things,
Correct.
and at each step of the way, like you could have said, like, okay, of these women who left who didn't leave to have a family, you spent X millions of dollars training them. That
Yeah.
was essentially flushed down the toilet. So you
Yeah.
could your profits the next year could have been that many millions better if you
Totally.
reduce this number. And do they find that money is a good way to
Yes.
convince people?
It tends to be. It tends to be among the bigger ones. And if you can show in the particular this project, they were concerned about what they were calling regrettable exits. And so how you want to define regrettable is an open question, but they defined it as people who like were considered high potential talent. And so it's like, yeah, you've lost all this money in training people and you lost someone who you think is a strong talent, right? And so like what is it? The challenge, but you're absolutely right that the challenge is then like no one likes to be told that they're wrong. And more often than not, I present these results, and this is not unique to this company, is I present the results and I present my findings, and they're like, yeah, but it still might be that thing I thought of. And you're like, I mean, maybe. Like, part of science is accepting that there's uncertainty, and maybe in this instance, the way I studied it, we could do it again, and we could, that's how knowledge is pushed forward is iteratively. But we just don't like it, and so you kind of find other narratives. And frankly, in this particular case, the CEO was convinced, and it was like, okay, I see it. But companies are bizarre, and this was a really big company, and so it takes a really long time for like the news to spread. So
Well,
even if the CEO is like, yeah, that makes sense, everyone else in the company is like they have to then buy it.
well, what was the reason why women were leaving?
So it was a mix of two things. One, there's problems with the company. Like they basically work people really hard. They don't really get bonuses even though they're supposed to. And there's like kind of a culture of like being the loudest voice in the room, which typically tends to not be as uh, let's say as much of a strength of women as men who tend to like
But
speak up more.
the first two things would affect both men and women.
Correct. And so one of the things I found was like, by the way, men are also leaving. And so in my research, I also studied what happened to men after they left, and I spoke with men and all that kind of thing. The key difference I found between why it was more women than men is it was that dissatisfaction, which affected everyone the same, plus the leadership is all male. And so it's like women were much less willing to put up with all that shit because there was less of an expectation you would actually advance to leadership
Mm.
positions. Whereas the men were like, I can put my head down and deal with this because I might get promoted. So that like was the main decider. It was like the combination of a shitty working environment, sorry to swear, and
It's okay.
okay, great. And a lack of possibility of getting high enough to actually change it that caused people to leave.
And so what did the CEO do?
To my knowledge, nothing, to be totally honest with you. And it's a bit of the frustrating part of this job. I've gone in since and done a couple other projects with them that they're, like I said, they asked me to come in and talk about sales in particular because it's a sales driven company. And so that's where I'm about to present that finding this year. So every year I do a project with them and I keep hoping something will change, and it hasn't yet. So.
And what other projects do you do with them?
So I help them design surveys to understand one was just to understand the diversity in their company across like 25 different dimensions. So one of the challenges also with this company is when they think of diversity, they tend to talk about just women. And there's a lot of different ways that you can be diverse that aren't just about men versus women. This is a global company, so obviously there's race and ethnicity, nationality, native language, all kinds of training background. So I designed a 25 question survey that was like about all different aspects of someone's diversity. So disability status, household income when you were growing up, or household's income when you were growing up, student loan debt, concerns about retirement, whether you're a primary caregiver, or whatever. And kind of all of that is to help the company understand who their people are. So if you're saying, let's just do something like design a policy that's more inclusive. Well, if you don't know what people's challenges are or what people's, kind of like key parts of their identity are that they wish they had more support for, then you can't really design thoughtful
So,
policies.
so let me ask like a totally naive question.
Please.
Uh, let's say you want a company with the best team, and because they're going to create the best results
Mhm.
down, and they're going to stay with you, and they're going to be happy. I'll take some of the factors you just said. Do you want people with high student loan debt? Is that an example of diversity? Like, let's get people
Great
with a
question.
diverse amount of student loan debt. Like, maybe I don't want people with problems.
Right.
So
Yep.
we want to get out rid of the people with all the problems.
Yep. The version of that I see play out in a lot of companies is with hiring veterans. And basically, there was a big push in the United States to hire veterans after their service. And it's like, well, you don't have experience maybe directly in this industry, but you have a lot of amazing experience and skills working in teams, leadership, organization, all the kind of stuff that can make you like super smart, make you a great employee. Then there started to be a big conversation around PTSD and how to make sure that you're managing and making it a safe place for vets who have PTSD. And then it became such a thing that it was like, we can't hire vets because they have PTSD and they're going to freak out in our office. And so that's like what began as a very thoughtful, inclusive policy ended up working against everyone and being like, yeah, I don't want to hire people with a million mental illnesses or problems or from some kind of a background that's not going to make sense for our company. And so it is a real problem. And then one of the things I do with companies is like if you think about diversity as like a regression line to make it just super boring, there's like the dependent variable is we want more diverse people. But the independent variables are what are all the things that could give rise to that diversity? The problem is that most people don't define what they mean by diversity. So do I mean women? Do I mean people of color? Whatever. And then they also just try to change that number without changing any of the inputs. And so then you hire a bunch of, say, Black people or a bunch of women or a bunch of people who are not engineers or whatever. And then they end up being miserable because it's not a company that's set up for that. And then they end up just leaving. Or it's like, yeah, let's hire people with disabilities, but there's nothing in our workplace that's remotely accessible. So you're just setting people up for failure. So I tend to guide companies towards like, why are you trying to be more diverse? With respect to what, right? Like I have a line that I say in trainings a lot is like, no one is sitting here talking about how we need diversity with respect to literacy. Like, gosh, everyone here is literate. There's no diversity in that at all, right? And maybe there is a benefit to having a few people who are illiterate because maybe they think in different ways or whatever, right?
Mm.
But be thoughtful about it and be like, if you want to do it for social justice reasons, that's great, fine. But what are the inputs? What's getting in the way of getting there? And so most people just try to move the needle on the numbers. Like, let's just recruit a bunch of Black people, or let's recruit a lot of women or promote a lot of women. When really, I think that the solution, that's some of it, but I think a bigger, deeper part of it is like, what are the decisions and procedures and methods in the company right now that are giving rise to the lack of the diversity that we see on this side?
And also, I guess, what can make the company, would the company be better if we are more diverse?
Yeah.
Because the CEO might be afraid. He might think,
Yes.
hey, I like just hanging out with all my Harvard buddies.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want to be more diverse.
Yeah.
How do you convince them that your company will actually be better if you're
Yeah.
more diversified?
Look, working in diverse groups is extremely difficult. It's way easier to work with people who think the way that you do, right? It's so much easier. I worked with a different company that's in journalism, and they wanted to increase their kind of like data science, data visualization, analysis, like research kind of projects. So they hired a whole bunch of academics and then jammed them into these meetings with all these journalists. And neither of them knew how to talk to one another. And within a year, all the academics had left. And so it's like, what a waste. It's not even like one person we trained. It's like this entire initiative just fell flat because we weren't willing to work on it. So what you have to do is say, and what I think is the case, and this is a working hypothesis for me, is that a lack of diversity in a company, to me, is usually a symptom of something else going wrong. And one of the pieces of evidence that something's not working great is that there's no diversity. So for instance, if you don't see a lot of diversity in leadership at a company with respect to whatever, then you might say, well, it's probably something around your promotion decision making, maybe as a first start. And then if you look at that and you're like, oh, look, you're just promoting people that you went to school with, or people who are similar to you, or people who speak the same language as you, or people who you work with most, and you can map that out using networks. Then you're like, oh, okay. One of the consequences of this is we don't see people of color, we don't see women, we don't see older people or whatever, right? But the solution is to then say, what is it about your promotion mechanism that's allowing all this bias to creep in? Something isn't formalized enough that's allowing us to just pick the people in our social networks. And the same is true, I think, for recruiting. The other piece of this is it's different in every company. And so that's like, not every company promotes people the same way. Not everyone has the same culture, and like you can have a culture that's very effective. And I say this to companies a lot, like, a culture that's aggressive, that's fast, that like we make decisions and we do things and we don't really pause to think about it. There's a lot of advantages to that. A disadvantage is you're going to miss the ideas of the person who takes a little bit longer to like come up with like a really great idea because they need to kind of like me, like sit in a corner in the dark for a while and then emerge and have an idea. That person's going to fail at this company. You as a company can make that choice for yourself, but just be aware of the trade-offs that you're making. And so like if you just are trying to execute and you don't want creative ideas, then it's okay unless you can just keep going, but you're not going to be diverse. You're not going to hit all these other things.
And so what's your best success story where you get into a company, everybody's unhappy, so that's affecting sales negatively.
Yep.
And if you make them happier in some way as a population, then the business became that much greater.
Yeah. So a good one is a company, and I sign like all these NDAs, so I'm going to be real vague, but it's a great company that's a startup, and it has an office.
It's called WeWork.
It's called WeWork, yeah. Have you heard of Uber? It's in Chelsea, and they just, to the point where I was a little bit concerned, like pretty much everything I said, they did. And I have been working with them for a couple of years, and I see that year over year, the people who show up, I audit, sometimes this is a cool project I do, is like I actually just sit in meetings and watch people interact and like take notes on it. That's like, like Jane Goodall with like the gorillas. Like I do that with like corporate people. And I'm like, well, whenever you make a group decision, it seems like the boss's voice carries the day. So I don't know why you're all having, and this took like a year to figure out, but I was like, so I don't know. And it's like literally making marks on a piece of paper. So I was like, I don't know why you're bothering having this meeting if literally whatever the boss thinks coming in is what they do going out. And I can show you that they did this 100 times. So then they changed it and they started doing a polling system. So they dragged in this big monitor. Everyone could like sign in, and then you basically just like vote on the different ideas, and it's all anonymous. I mean, it's like 10 people, so you can probably trace it out. And then they decide on whatever it is they're going to do that they're brainstorming that day based on that. Whether that's ultimately going to do anything remains to be seen because these are kind of slow processes. But generally speaking, I think that like from what I can see, like engagement is going up and people are paying more attention in meetings. Like these are little tiny things, but these kinds of like being able to experiment with these is a lot of fun.
So how do you scale this? Again, I think that some of these projects you could kind of productize.
Yeah.
Like here's the, diversity quotient. Everybody in the company's got to take this test. Here's the engagement quotient. Right. Here's the are women happy research test. So it seems like you could productize some of these things and show before and after case studies of how they work. But otherwise, you're going to be sitting in like hundreds of meetings taking notes.
I ask myself this all the time when I'm in like meeting number 97. I'm like, oh, there's got to be a better way. So yeah.
So is that like a plan to figure out how to do it?
Yeah. Like, do you have a plan of any kind? That is the plan. I don't know quite what it looks like. If you're looking for work, let's talk. It sounds like you're not. But no. So my whole thing is, so I come from a research background, and so what I am trying to do more of is to either, the two paths I see are transition what I'm doing into less doing it and more teaching people in companies or in whatever organization. I basically study humans in groups, so it kind of doesn't matter what the group is. How to design these studies themselves. Like doing the exercise of like, if this, then what is a skill you can learn, and then you can do it and you don't need people like me. So like, and there's a lot of resources out there about how to write a good survey and that kind of stuff, right? So it's like, if women are leaving the company to start families, this is what we should see in the data. Let's go look and see if it's there. If it's not, maybe this isn't the strongest explanation. Like being able to think like that is the skill that I think that I offer. And so I can either
now you've done this service enough. The common problems, B, the common theories that CEOs have,
right,
and C, how to test those theories,
right,
and D, how to then execute.
Well, and people in companies are going to have better theories about what's actually going on than I am. And so that's part of why I do all these interviews too, is that like I have guesses about what's not working, and it tends to be some common themes between companies, exactly as you said. But a lot of times, you're working in the company, what's going wrong. And it's sort of like, so I have all these meetings where I'm just like, tell me what's not working. And then from there, I'm like, oh, everyone seems to be pointing to this part of the life. And then let's dig in and go from there. And there's a bit of like kind of creativity mixed with scientific methods. So increasingly, I'd like to offer a service to people to learn how to do that, as opposed to being the person who does that.
Right, because then potentially, so right now probably HR probably
Yeah.
the CEO yells at HR,
100%.
HR reaches out to you, so
Yep.
they're not threatened by you, right?
Correct.
And is anyone in the company threatened by you? No, probably not really.
I'm not no. Yeah.
And so HR then takes your results, so at least they could say to the CEO, "Well, we showed you
Yeah.
this," whether the CEO does
Yeah.
anything or not. But maybe a product where you kind of train HR
Yeah.
to, or the other way you could expand is just, and maybe this is good, maybe this is bad, but you could just hire
Right.
more people to be consultants like you
Right.
and do what you do. So you're like kind of the initial face of the company and the initial sales, but then you bring in your team,
Yeah.
kind of like a McKinsey, like a consulting
Right.
agency.
Right. Which maybe is how consulting originally was invented. I don't know. But
Yeah.
that's the second path is like I could find other people who ideally who are trained in social science and can do this kind of stuff. Because basically, so I did my PhD in political science and I was a professor for a long time
Where?
studying at NYU.
Mhm.
And I was studying political systems, like how humans vote for leaders and what the consequences of those leaders making decisions. And I was just like really bored and wanted to do something more related to the real world. And so I was like, let's see if these skills apply anywhere. And it turns out it applies perfectly in companies because apart from the whole elections thing, companies and countries are very, very similar, right? In terms of like, it's a bunch of people and the main currencies are things like power and influence and privilege and all this kinds of stuff, right? It's not like a market transaction within the organization, even if they're in a market. And so it's been very stunning to me how well these things apply. And so, yeah, so if anyone listening is a social scientist in academia who's bored, get at me and we'll set this up. But there's very few of us, I
So
think.
I think too, I feel like too, you could probably write a quick book, like the 10 most important questions CEOs
Yeah.
ask.
Oh, that's good. I'm gonna use that. Oh, you can be a co-author. That's very good.
No,
Yeah.
you can have it. You can
Ah,
have that.
thanks.
You can have the whole idea.
If
And
anyone's a publisher, come talk to me too. Yeah.
no, just self-publish. Just
All
write it
right.
down, self-publish. Write a bunch of articles on LinkedIn, then
Yeah.
staple them together and publish it on Amazon.
Okay.
And then you start getting speaking gigs too.
Yeah, I gotta buy a stapler, but I like that plan otherwise.
Yeah,
Yeah.
stapler is like old-fashioned.
Yeah, I like it though.
But you can still, they're still useful.
Yeah.
And what else was I thinking? I don't know. I don't know what I was
Those are good
thinking.
ideas.
So you went from being a professor to doing this consulting.
Yeah.
How many clients do you have right now?
It depends on how you want to define clients. I'd say like 30. I have a mix of like, so a lot of times I just come in and do like a speaking thing where I'm like, here's the mathematical reason that diversity might be good. Here are some of the ways to think about it. Here's what, kind of what you're just describing. And then I have some, so there's tons of those. And then I have some that I have these like annual projects or monthly projects or ongoing like.
So transcribe some of those talks.
Yeah, seriously.
Show some case studies, and boom, you have the book finished.
I got to talk to you more. I'm wandering around. I'm like, what do I do about this? But you're totally right.
Now,
You're right.
I want to look at it just one
Okay.
quick second from the other perspective. If I'm an employee at a big company, regardless of whether everybody's happy, sad, whatever, what strategically can I do to move up the fastest, either in this company or in my industry? Like, what are the qualities of the person who dominates? Is there any one set of qualities that work the best?
That is tough to say, just because I will say, naively, perhaps coming from academia, where like I kind of just thought of the corporate world as this monolith. Every company is insanely different, and the things that get you ahead in one are very different from another, which tends to be part of the explanation for why you see certain types of people at the top of companies versus others, just because of how the culture is. But I would say that generally, like, this is so sleazy, but what I do whenever I meet a new company is I chat with people for a while, and then I'm like, oh, I see. Like, getting to the top of any company is a game. And you have to like exhibit a certain set of qualities. So figure out what those are and then fake it, and then you'll get there. That's like my cynical.
Like what's an example? Like not without naming any companies.
Sure.
What's like a big company where you figured out the rules of this game for that company? It was different from other companies. And if you were to advise employees of that company how to rise up, what would you advise them to do?
Yeah, so
what are the rules of that game?
So I literally just wrote out an equation for a company. It was sort of a tongue-in-cheek exercise, but I mean it. So it's like, so this is a what's the word I'm looking for here? Consumer product goods, CPG company. So the best way to become a leader in this company is to, one, work in the sales function, because that's like the front line of the business and people really respect you if you work in that function, even if the other functions are very important like HR or whatever, or legal. You got to start in sales. Then you have to expand and go to marketing so that you prove that you can do both sides of the commercial aspect of the business. Then make sure you're best friends with the person who makes the decisions for promoting and do whatever it takes. Like go to games with them, like make sure that you're like, your families hang out together. You've got to just play that game. And then finally be the loudest person in the room, even if your work isn't that great. How shitty is that? But that's totally how you get ahead.
All right,
it's depressing.
That's a great formula.
Yeah. And it probably works in a lot of companies.
So you don't have a name for the company. It's just you as consultant.
Yep.
Probably having a name, maybe as you expand.
It might help. Yeah.
So Andrea Jones-Rooy, thanks so much for coming on the podcast, and let me know what happens next. Whether it's book expansion, product as service, whatever it is you do next.
Yeah, I'll send you a copy of all of those things when they're done. Yeah,
excellent.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Andrea.
Thanks for having me.
Bye.